Hi, I'm Aegis Cores, and welcome to another episode of EU5. I am continuing my nation run with the British Empire. In part 1 of the series, I defeated France in the Hundred Years' War. They're now under my dominion control. My king is the emperor of both nations. In part 2, I took over all of Iberia and ultimately blocked them from expansion into the colonial game. So I have a foothold now in the Americas, into the Caribbean, Western and Southern Africa, and continued expansion. Starting to colonize or start to send some colonial exploration into Eastern Zimbabwe regions of Africa, in order to start to get the foothold into India, with the end game result of conquesting Australia, New Zealand, and all of the South Pacific and some of the other regions into northern Japan and whatnot. As you can see, I am the number 2 great power, well behind the Wu at the start here in 1595, but I'll close that gap. I'm starting to snowball my economy a little bit now, starting to integrate France into my nation. So I'll start to get my tax base up and build up some of the newer economies. I'll get the tech before they do, so I'll be able to snowball a little bit quicker than they will, and ultimately build a nation that stands the test of time, where the sun never sets, on the great British Empire. There's a couple of techs you want to be mindful of as you're starting out the campaign. The first one is malaria, that you won't be able to get towards the 5th age, the age of absolutism. But you want to rush for that as soon as possible, because especially if you're looking to invade into Africa and India, that could become a challenge with the armies, where you'll take a lot of attrition. So rushing for that will help. In the current age of discovery, I'm rushing for the exploration, which just gives you a CB opportunity to invade some of these colonial regions. It's not the best CB. I feel like it should have a little bit more buff, because the minus 30% war score in India is tough, because you can't really take a ton of their land as they have a high population. But you can use it in Parliament here. You can use it in nations here in Africa that are a little bit easier to invade. Their land isn't as valuable as it is in India. And these are straightforward wars, right? Kilwa and the other nations in Zimbabwe region are really not a match. I'm able to quickly just move in. They are a little bit quicker. Their troops away. That's probably the hardest part of these wars, right? So taking it pretty quickly, sieging down the 2 forts that they have, and making sure they're not unsieging behind me. So if you take it slowly enough, make sure you're not taking any kind of unnecessary attrition. Make sure that their navies don't kind of catch you off guard too. Just because I have not built up a strong navy at the start, because I didn't really need it with all of my vassal swarms invading Iberia. So I'll begin to start to build that out as the Indian nations are going to have a lot more pose more of a threat from a naval game perspective. But here you can see, after you conquest, you can create a naval or colonial vassal that you can create in these nations and use that. And they're a little bit more loyal than traditional vassals, so you can feed them quite a bit of land. They'll actually declare on some of these nations down the line that you'll kind of get called into, to clean up some of the Eastern African nations that doesn't require me to kind of allocate any resources. That they usually are able to kind of handle this their own. From here, I created another CB against the Horn of Africa, Somalia, and Ajuran. Easy enough war again. I think Somalia is a little bit more difficult, just because they have a number of forts that are mountain, desert, so you take a lot of attrition here. But with my 2 standing armies that I have established now, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, it's just sieging it down, Ajuran getting them down enough so I can cypher piece them, grab all the coastline, and at the end goal of this campaign is creating additional colonial vassal, control this territory, give me a little bit more of that diplomatic income, and continue my expansion into the colonial empire I tend to be. I don't intend to take this land for myself. and have to deal with the annexation, integrations of it, and you're not going to get any value of the territory, especially now that I've already established that naval governor swarm in Iberia. I'd have to delete all of those or create a new vessel in Iberia and start that chain again, which is possible. I just didn't feel like doing it for this campaign. It was just going to go more into the traditional British colonial conquest of Africa. So at the conclusion of that campaign, I now have my first opportunity to invade India. I have my troops right there, ready to invade. You see France is always going to join my wars as my Union member, but they're not going to be much help into this war as far as way they are. So I invade. I have 50,000 plus as a standing army now. You see, you take a lot of attrition. So I'm not moving my troops away from that fort until it's down, that they don't potentially catch me off guard. There's 2 nations in the war. Not too worried about it, but it's just, yeah, the attrition is really the hard part, right? You can see I've lost a lot of manpower here, but luckily with all of the armories I've built and integrated across Iberia, manpower is really not an issue for this run. I'm overpowered in that capacity. The really challenge is that the territories are quite expensive. You can't really take a lot of the Indian nation's territory. You're taking 2 or 3 at a time, just because it's high population, high control. You know, as we hear, are in the 1630s already. But my nation is ahead in military tech, so I have that strategic advantage. I don't even send levies. I just have my standing armies now that will be here for the remainder of the game in India, right? It doesn't make sense to use that unnecessary attrition that's taken from shepherding them from England over here. So I do that. I win that war in India, back at war with Somalia, just to kind of finish it off, give me the full coastline there into the Horn, and basically just kind of play the colonial game here in West Africa. This will be the last war that I have in Africa. I mainly was doing it in peacetime, allowing that to kind of tick down. Move my troops over, invade the castles, and take all of the territory there. You can take a large amount in Somalian and Anjuran land, wipe them from the game, and now I have a colonial empire in the west of Africa. And then move my troops back to war with the Indian nations. Taking it slowly but surely, right? It's ultimately a slow push north into central India, so to speak. So they have a lot of forts, but as soon as you start to break them down, they'll actually start to delete some of these forts because they start to derail from an economic perspective. The only thing I have a threat is the stronger nations in the north invade them after me. So the ultimate goal is to start to isolate them from the remainder of India. See, I kind of grabbed all of the coastline. I created the British Raj, kind of as a nod to Hearts of Iron 4 and the British Raj with Britain. So kind of using that as the playthrough. You can rename them with whatever you like. You can see Ceylon's in here as well, so I intend to take all of that to make sure that nobody's really coming up from behind. It becomes more of a linear path to war as you go to war with all of these nations. You can see I'm still kind of expanding into the Americas. They pull you into wars routinely with some of the Native American nations. But again, you make sure that you're calling in your other colonial nations into those wars, and they quickly make mince of them. It's one thing I didn't notice is that the colonial nations won't automatically get called into these wars. You have to actually call them in with favors or a promise of land. So, I intend to give them anyway. Here you can see a rebellion, but sometimes rebellions open up the opportunity to take more land from India. So now I've taken all of Ceylon, or however you say it. Back at war with Reddy, I think is the name of the nation here, that I go through a series of wars. And I speed this up pretty quickly. I'm going war after war with these nations. I've created a good foothold now for the British Raj. And between myself and them coming into these wars, they have a lot of manpower now to kind of raise from a levy perspective. And then my standing armies I'm using to kind of sit on the castles, allow them to kind of siege down some of the province capitals that'll just give you more territory. And then just kind of continue to push forward. I actually did annex all of Ceylon, finishing it off. I don't know why it's not a land bridge. So you have to kind of move ferries, which is annoying. I know in the EU4 you can kind of just walk across. So that's just something to be mindful of. And it's kind of like a peninsula, so you have to kind of sail around the entire island. You can't kind of sail through it, which I don't get. Why wouldn't you be able to sail through it if you can't move your troops over from a walk path perspective? But here you go again, back at war with India, moving in and trying to take on some of these larger nations, right? It's not difficult because you have the technological advantage. The difficult part is really just like the limit in terms of how much you can take from a max war score perspective, as well as just making sure that there's not an ally block that can come in that can kind of wipe, because some of these Indian nations could have 300,000-400,000 levies, and I only have right now about 50,000 standing army. I'm going to create additional levies now. As you can see, my economy is starting to snowball pretty well. I have like 60k in money that I've just not been paying attention to in terms of spending, but you make a lot of money as England. And you can easily start to support quite a large military hegemon. So use it to your advantage. Start to build those up and then move them over. As you can see here, 1662. After over a century, I have finally been able to annex France. It's been an annoying instance. I know that I was probably annexing Iberian and Irish nations at the same time, so it kind of delays things when you're doing some of these larger nations. But I finally got them. I finally have all of France and Iberia under my control. I still have a number of smaller vassals in both regions that I have to kind of clean up. But continuing the push towards wars with India, as you can see, you get through a lot of tech in the age of obsolescence. So make sure that you're staying on top of upgrading the buildings. I've been recently watching the House of Guinness on Netflix, which just kind of inspired me to upgrade that beer workshop to the large-scale brewery in Dublin first. But upgrade every one of these buildings. It's kind of a free upgrade. Doesn't take a building slot. Might take a little bit of more manpower to like upgrade the facilities from some of these, but manpower is not an issue. You can see I'm almost at 50 million people in my country now between all of those nations. So certainly is not an issue with manpower, not an issue with getting these factories and kind of creating a snowballed economy. Back here, another series of wars as we move into the 1680s, another series of wars against India, just to kind of snipe more and more land, right? It just becomes a little bit more rinse and repeat. How do you make sure that you're staying on top of peacetime? Antagonism isn't much of an issue. There is a little bit of a coalition, but because of their culture, it's not too much. I've only been invading Catholic nations prior to this, and there's a lot of antagonism buffs that happen in the Age of Obsolescence. So you're not really worried about a coalition war coming against you, and I'm going to be able to overpower any of them anyway. So now I'm just trying to separate them from the remainder of the Indian vassals so that I'm not getting potential to have them come in and take that territory out from underneath me. I took Maldives there. So I've continued my expansion into some of these larger nations, cleaning up some of the borders. I don't intend to take all of the current day Indian territories or even where they were at the start of like Hearts of Iron 4 in terms of the British Raj and Pakistan. I just really intend to take more of the southern footprint where a lot of the valuable land is, a lot of like the valuable territories. The British Raj becomes pretty overpowered from a vassal perspective, who stays pretty loyal despite the sheer large size that you have. as you can see with these nations, you really can't take a lot of territory with the CBs, whether it's the exploration CB or the religious CB. I was rotating between the both of them to see if like one was just not working. The exploration just didn't seem to be. It actually just seemed I couldn't take as much territory, so I've been using the religious CB just because I took more territory with that than I could with the exploration CB. But the exploration CB allows you to get to territories that's not directly attached to your land or your vassal's land. So it does have its value and its place in a colonial game. And I could have used it to invade maybe more of the Malaysian nations, but I really wanted to kind of keep my focus on India and continue the exploration and the conquests or the colonial game in the South Pacific and in the Americas as well. So not showing that on offline, but I'll show you where we kind of net out at the end of the campaign on how we've established some of these larger empires. And so the colonial nations are calling me into wars simultaneously. But again, they are overpowered on anything that's there from like the New World perspective. As you can see, there's just limited spots of territories that are inside my British Raj colonial nation that I really just want to clean up, right? It's just more about making sure I don't have border gore, have clean borders, kind of push towards the mountainous regions in India, and create a clean break at the end of the 17th century, as we're moving into the 18th century, and in the full thrones of the Age of Absolutism. So ending the campaign before we get towards more of the revolutions that happen, and creating an empire that stands the test of time, right? Here we are in war with India and then in war with Mexico that my colonial empire have. So I'm stretched kind of on both ends, although I'm not doing anything in the Americas. My colonial nation's doing all of the heavy lifting. And to be honest, the British Raj is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in these wars, right? I just kind of sit on a lot of the forts. Most of the battles, I just let them kind of take it, and then I'll kind of come in and support them from a battle if I siege down the fort in time. And there's kind of mid-max, get all of the territory that you can, isolate the territories as much as possible, because the less control that they have of the territory, the more you're able to actually take from a war score perspective. So as you start to separate these countries, it becomes a little bit easier to take more and more land grabs in the latter half of these campaigns, right? There's a lot of nations here in India. There's still a lot more. Punjabi is the main force. I don't actually go to war with them at all in this campaign. Luckily, there wasn't any kind of guarantees that are happening or alliances that would happen, which would kind of potentially give me a much larger war than I was looking for, with about 100,000 in standing army that I have now over here in India. But it's fun kind of playthrough here and building up and blobbing into the Indian nations. I just wish you can kind of take more land at a time, and I probably would have been able, for this video, to blob much further into the Indian subcontinent. But because it is a little bit more painful in terms of how long you have your truce time after 100% war score with co-belligerent nations into the war, it just becomes a little tedious taking too much territory, right? So wanted to get towards a stopping point here. As we moved into the 1715, just finished my final war with India. I'm at a war with Mexico right now, separate piecing all of the nations there just to blob as much as possible, and then feeding them into the various number of colonial nations I've created here, right? I have Americas, I've created some Great Plains provinces, some West Coast provinces, colonial nations, just so that America didn't get too overpowered. I created a couple of vassals here into Mexico, British Mexico. I did like an Azteca and a Baja, just because you have to be adjacent to feed them territories. So sometimes you have to create additional colonial nations with some of these wars. So a little bit of border gore here would, clean these up in the coming centuries. But it's pretty turnkey, right? They kind of go about it with more on their own in terms of declaration. So I have not been really focused on any sort of expansion into Mexico. I've just kind of let my colonial nations do the declaration and then just kind of observe it just to make sure that they're not losing it, potentially losing territories that I've already kind of conquest. but it's never really an issue, right? British Azteca. But it's pretty straightforward in terms of the conquests in the New World, right? They're just going to be overpowered, these nations. And ultimately, you're just kind of creating the vassals or the new colonial vassals, or feeding land to vassals if they're kind of adjacent to it. Ultimately, creating a wide stretching empire for England. So that really takes us to the end of the campaign. We had a successful run at winning the 100 Years' War, defeating the colonizers in Iberia before they were able to colonize. It really gave us an opportunity to have free reign at the colonial. The only nations that really colonized besides me was there was a couple that colonized into Canada, like the Dutch nations. Naples actually started to, or Sicily, two Sicilies started to colonize into South America. Burgundy also becomes, or was Provence and becomes Burgundy. Colonize into like Argentina. But I really have a strong foothold into India, into Australia, colonize up into like uncolonized land in Japan and Siberia. Most of the South Pacific islands have now been colonized by me, and really had that huge control into Africa. And really the goal of the campaign was win that 100 Years' War, and then how I can create this global, strong, stretching empire. And you can see I've created these colonies in all throughout the Philippines. As you move into Russia there, and all of the Americas are now under my control, with exception of a handful of these territories. And I can easily go to war with those nations in Europe that own that land now that I've had, most of India into my control. But we're gonna call the series from here. I think it was, ultimately we became the #1 great power in that last war, and then we lost it. But we're kind of always moving on between 1 and 2 on Wu, right? We've closed the gap from an economy perspective. We're the #2 great power still, but we're the naval hegemon, the military hegemon. The opportunity to invade places like Egypt and some of the more historical nations that Britain owned, moving into World War II and post-World War I in terms of conquest of the Ottoman Empire, are opportunities, right? But the ultimate goal, we got that Union Jack on the diplomacy, and you can see we'll eventually take over the diplomatic hegemon there, as we're the #1. It just takes a couple years before you become that, and really become the #1 slot over Wu, who has gone through a number of civil wars the last 2 decades or so. Have pretty good control over all of the British, French, and Iberian lands with my naval governor hack. So it's still valuable land. I have 4 governors all throughout England, and they were able to kind of create a good snowballed economy. And you can see we have so many vassals that we've created from a colony perspective, with the great power of the British Empire. So hope everyone liked it. Please like and subscribe and follow along. I'll be releasing the full-length video over the weekend that just combines 1 through 3. So hope everyone enjoyed the video. Thanks, everyone.